I want to say something before I get into any of this, and I need you to hear me clearly. I am not a superstitious person. I have a degree in accounting from Oklahoma State. I did 2 years at a mid-tier firm in Oklahoma City before the layoffs in 2024, and I spent the better part of a year after that doing contract bookkeeping for small businesses that couldn't afford a real accountant and didn't want to pay for QuickBooks support. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand the kind of person I am. I like spreadsheets. I like when columns balance. I like explanations. And what happened to me at Harmon Terrace Apartments doesn't have one, and I've stopped trying to make one fit. I moved to Tulsa in February of 2026. The reason was money. The reason is always money. My mother had been living in a memory care facility in Broken Arrow since the previous autumn. And even with her Medicare supplement, the gap between what insurance covered and what the facility actually charged was about $2,200 a month. My sister in Fayetteville helped when she could, which wasn't often. I'd been burning through what little savings I had while working 3 remote contracts that together paid less than my old junior analyst salary. Tulsa was the move because it was close to my mother, cheap enough to survive in, and had just enough of an economy that I could maybe pick up something local to supplement the remote work. I found Harmon Terrace on a Tuesday afternoon in early February, and I remember the weather because it was one of those Oklahoma winter days that can't decide what it is. 48 degrees and sunny when I left the storage unit where I'd been keeping my furniture. 39 and spitting ice by the time I pulled into the parking lot off East 31st Street. The complex sat south of the IDL, in that stretch of midtown Tulsa where the neighborhoods start getting quieter but haven't quite tipped into neglected. It was 3 buildings arranged in a shallow U around a courtyard that had probably been nice in the 80s. Now it was patchy brown grass, 2 concrete benches, and a single ornamental pear tree that looked like it had survived more ice storms than it had any right to. The buildings themselves were 3 stories, brick and siding, exterior staircases with iron railings that had been painted dark green at some point in the last decade. Ordinary, completely ordinary. I want to stress that. There was nothing about Harmon Terrace that suggested anything other than what it was, a mid-range apartment complex for people who needed a place to live and didn't have the luxury of being picky about it. The property manager was a woman named Donna Keeler, mid-50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain. One of those faces that had been settling into its creases for so long it had arrived at a kind of permanent, practical friendliness. She ran the leasing office out of a ground-floor unit in Building A that still had the faint smell of the previous tenant's carpet shampoo. She showed me the available unit. 2C in Building B, 2nd floor, 1 bedroom, $640 a month including water and trash. And I said yes before she'd finished showing me the bathroom. It had a window. The bathroom had a window. After the basement sublet I'd been in back in Oklahoma City, that alone was worth it. I signed the lease that afternoon. Donna walked me through the standard stuff: parking assignments, mail keys, laundry room hours in the basement of Building C, noise ordinances per Tulsa Municipal Code, all normal, all fine. Then she handed me a single sheet of yellow paper, not goldenrod, not cream, yellow, the kind of yellow you associate with legal pads, except this was printed, not handwritten, on a standard sheet of copy paper that happened to be that color. At the top it said, Resident Guidelines, Building B, Supplemental. I glanced at it. 6 items, numbered, in a plain serif font. Times New Roman, maybe. I started reading and Donna said, and I remember this very clearly, she said, "That one's non-negotiable. Everything else you know. We're flexible people. Late on rent by a couple days, you call me, we work it out. But that page, you follow it to the letter." I looked at her. She wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't frowning either. Her face had just sort of emptied out, the way a person's face does when they're concentrating on something they're not going to explain. I read the page right there in the office. This is what it said, as close to verbatim as I can reconstruct. I kept the original for a while, but I'll get to what happened to it. 1. Between the hours of 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. each evening, all residents of Building B must be inside their units with their doors closed and locked. This applies every day of the week without exception. 2. During the 8 to 9 p.m. hour, do not open your windows. If your windows are already open, close them before 7:50 p.m. to allow time for a proper seal. 3. Do not play music, television, or any audio at a volume that could be heard outside your unit during the 8 to 9 p.m. hour. Headphones are strongly recommended. Silence is preferred. 4. If you hear knocking at your door during the 8 to 9 p.m. hour, do not answer it. Do not acknowledge it verbally. Do not approach the door. 5. If you hear what sounds like a conversation in the hallway, the stairwell, or the courtyard during the 8 to 9 p.m. hour, disregard it entirely. Do not attempt to identify the speakers or determine the subject of the conversation. 6. At 9 p.m., you may resume normal activity. If anything appears different about the hallway, the stairwell, or the courtyard when you first open your door after 9 p.m., do not mention it to other residents. Contact the management office the following business day. I read it twice. Then I looked at Donna and did what I think most people would do. I laughed. Not a big laugh, a short one. The kind that's really a question. Is this a noise ordinance thing? I asked. Donna took the yellow page from me, slid it into a plastic sleeve protector, and handed it back. Keep it somewhere you'll see it every day until you've got it memorized. After that, keep it anyway. Donna, what is quiet hour? 8 to 9, like it says. No, I mean, what is it for? Is there a resident with a medical condition? A legal situation? I've lived in places with noise restrictions before, but this is... It's the way Building B works, she said. She picked up her coffee mug, which I remember had a faded Oral Roberts University logo on it, and she took a sip that was very clearly the end of the conversation. You follow those 6 rules and you will have a perfectly nice experience here. I mean that. People stay in this complex for years. We have almost no turnover in Building B. That sentence. I think about that sentence all the time now. We have almost no turnover in Building B. At the time it sounded like a selling point. Now I understand what she was actually telling me. I moved in on a Saturday. My sister drove down from Fayetteville with a borrowed truck, and we hauled everything up to 2C by early afternoon. The unit was clean, freshly painted in that generic off-white that every apartment in America uses, with brown carpet that was newer than I'd expected, and a kitchen with laminate countertops in a pattern trying very hard to look like granite. The bedroom window faced east, toward the courtyard. The living room window faced west, toward the parking lot, and, beyond it, a strip of East 31st where traffic moved in that unhurried Tulsa way that made Oklahoma City feel like Manhattan by comparison. My sister left around 4. I spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking boxes and assembling the cheap IKEA bookshelf I'd bought in a moment of optimism about having a real living space again. Around 7, I heated up a gas station burrito in the microwave, sat on the couch, and opened my laptop to catch up on a client's monthly reconciliation. At 7:45, I heard my neighbor's door close. 2B, a firm, deliberate sound, lock turning. Then, within the next few minutes, the same from other units. Doors closing, locks engaging. The hallway, which had been carrying the faint sounds of living. Someone's TV, a child's voice, the clatter of dishes, went quiet in a way that felt less like silence and more like suction, like the sound had been pulled out of the air. I'll be honest, I'd half forgotten about the yellow page. It was on the kitchen counter where I'd tossed it with the rest of the move-in paperwork, but the silence reminded me, and I checked the time. 7:51. I got up, closed the 2 windows I'd cracked to air out the paint smell, and locked my front door. I stood there in my living room for a moment, listening. I felt faintly ridiculous. I was a 31-year-old woman with an accounting degree standing in my new apartment, obeying a set of instructions I didn't understand because a property manager with a coffee mug had told me to. But I obeyed them. I put in my earbuds, set the TV volume to its lowest setting, and went back to my reconciliation. The hour passed. Nothing happened. At 9:02, I took out my earbuds, and the building came back to life in stages. A door opening somewhere above me, footsteps on the exterior stairs, the muffled thud of a bass line starting up from a unit on the 3rd floor. Normal sounds, living sounds. I told myself, noise ordinance. Weird one, strict one, but that's what it is. Some previous tenant probably had a legal issue, or there's an elderly resident with a sensitivity, or the walls are so thin that the complex instituted a mandatory break to keep people from killing each other. I could make it make sense. I could balance that column. The first week went like that. Every evening at around 7:45, the building would begin its ritual. Doors closing, locks turning, silence descending. By 9, life resumed. I didn't think about it much. I was busy. I'd picked up a 4th contract. Payroll processing for a chain of vape shops across green country. And between that, and visiting my mother 3 times a week, I barely had time to notice the rhythms of the building, let alone question them. But in the 2nd week, something small happened that I couldn't quite file away. It was a Wednesday. I'd gotten home late from Broken Arrow, and I was rushing to close up the apartment before 8. I got the window shut, the door locked, and was heading for the couch when I realized I'd left my phone in the car. The time was 7:58. I stood at my front door, hand on the deadbolt, doing the math. Parking lot was maybe 90 seconds away. I could be back in 3 minutes, 4 tops. Did I really need my phone in the next hour? I decided I didn't. But as I stepped back from the door, I looked through the peephole. Just instinct, just curiosity. The hallway was empty. Of course it was. Everyone was in their units. But the light was wrong. The hallway in Building B was lit by those long fluorescent tubes behind plastic diffuser panels, the kind that give everything a flat, buzzy, institutional look. I'd walked through that hallway a dozen times, and the light had always been the same. Steady, slightly too bright, faintly green-tinged. Through the peephole at 7:59 on that Wednesday, the light in the hallway had a warmth to it that I couldn't explain. Not warm like the bulbs had changed. Warm like the quality of the air itself had shifted. Like late afternoon sunlight was coming from somewhere it shouldn't be, filling the corridor with the kind of amber glow you see in the last 20 minutes before sunset in August. In February, in an interior hallway with no windows. I blinked, and it was gone. The hallway was fluorescent again, flat and buzzy and slightly too bright. My phone's clock read 8 o'clock exactly. I told myself I'd been staring through a peephole, which distorts things. I told myself the fluorescent tube was probably flickering and my brain had filled in the color shift. I told myself it didn't matter. I didn't look through the peephole during quiet hour again for almost 2 weeks. The thing about rules you don't understand is that they create a relationship with the space you're in. I don't know how else to describe it. My apartment was my apartment. I slept in it, I worked in it, I ate in it, I was comfortable in it. But between 8 and 9 each night it became something else. A container. A shell I was sealed inside while something I hadn't been told about happened on the other side of the walls. And not knowing what that something was didn't make me less aware of it. It made me more aware. The absence of an explanation is its own kind of presence. I met some of my neighbors during that 2nd and 3rd week. The guy in 2A was Dale, retired pipe fitter, late 60s. The kind of Oklahoman who calls everyone Bud and has opinions about the Turnpike Authority. The woman in 2D, Directly across the hall was Yolanda, maybe 40, who worked at the St. Francis hospital system doing something administrative. Above me in 3C was a younger guy named Ren, short for Lorenzo, who was finishing a nursing program at TCC and worked nights at a Quick Trip 3 or 4 days a week. I tried to bring up quiet hour with each of them, casually, the way you'd ask about any building policy. Dale, when I asked, did this thing with his jaw. Not quite clenching, more like he was physically holding a set of words inside his mouth and deciding whether to let any of them out. Then he said, "Just follow the paper, bud. Don't overthink it." And he changed the subject to the Tulsa City Council's latest parking ordinance with a speed that felt practiced. Yolanda was more direct. She stopped me in the stairwell one afternoon, and I hadn't even asked yet. I just mentioned I was getting used to the building's routines. She looked at me with an expression I now recognize as concern, but at the time read as impatience. "You follow the rules on the yellow page?" she asked. "Yes." "Every night?" "Every night." "Then you're fine. Don't ask Donna about it again. Don't ask the other tenants. And I mean this the way I'd mean it if I told you not to touch a hot stove. I'm not being mysterious. I'm being practical. You leave it alone and it leaves you alone." That word. It. She said it and then immediately looked like she wished she hadn't, and she went upstairs without saying anything else. Ren was the only one who would actually talk about it, and even then, only in fragments. We'd started a habit of smoking on the exterior stairwell landing between the second and third floors. He smoked Camels. I'd bummed one or two and was in danger of picking the habit back up after quitting in college. It was a Thursday night, well after 9, cold enough that our breath mixed with the cigarette smoke in a way that made it hard to tell which was which. "You been here long?" I asked. "Since August." "You ever figure out what quiet hour actually is?" He flicked ash over the railing. Below us, the courtyard was dark except for a single light on a timer near Building C's entrance. The ornamental pear tree threw a shadow that moved slightly in a wind I couldn't feel from where we were standing. "My first month," he said, "I had a shift that ran until 8:30. 3 times a week I wouldn't get home until 8:45. Donna gave me a key to the side entrance of Building C so I could wait out the rest of the hour in the laundry room. She told me under no circumstances should I be in Building B's hallways during that time. Not the stairs, not the breezeway, not the courtyard on the Building B side. Why? She didn't say, but the way she said it. Like, you know how someone can say something and you can tell they've said it many times, and every time they say it they're terrified it won't be enough. Like that. Did you ever? Once. He took a drag, held it, let it out slow. I was running late, like really late. It was 8:12 and I was coming up the stairs to the 3rd floor. I figured, it's 12 minutes in. Probably nothing's happening. I'll just get to my door quick. He stopped. I waited. The courtyard light below us flickered once and then steadied. "The hallway was wrong," he said. I don't know how to say it better than that. It was all there. The same carpet, the same lights, the same doors. But the proportions were off. Like the hallway was longer than it should have been. Not by a lot, maybe by a few feet. And the door numbers. They were there, but they were hard to read. Not blurry. More like my brain kept sliding off them. I'd look at 3C, my door, and I'd see the 3 and the C, but I couldn't hold them together. They kept separating in my head. "What did you do?" I walked to my door, fast, got inside, locked it, sat on my kitchen floor until 9. He dropped the cigarette and stepped on it. The next morning I measured the hallway with a tape measure, from the stairwell door to the end wall, 72 feet, exactly what it should be. Did you tell Donna? She already knew. She knocked on my door the next afternoon. She didn't ask me what I saw or what happened. She just asked me if I was going to follow the rules from now on. I said yes, and I have. He looked at me, and I could see, even in the bad light, that he wanted me to understand something he didn't want to have to say aloud. It's not that I think the rules are protecting us from something dangerous, he said slowly. It's that I think the rules are part of an agreement, and I don't know who the other party is. March came in gray and wet, and I settled into the rhythm. Wake up, coffee, remote work, visit mom on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Come home, eat, work more, close up for quiet hour, resume at 9, sleep. The routine of it was almost soothing. I'd been so unmoored for the past year, losing the job, moving twice, watching my mother's recognition of me flicker like a signal cutting in and out, that having a fixed structure, even an inexplicable one, gave me something to organize my days around. My mother was getting worse. That's not relevant to what happened at Harmon Terrace, except that it is, because it was the thing that made me vulnerable. I want to be clear about that. I don't think what happened targeted me because I was weak, but I think my particular kind of sadness, the grief of losing someone who's still alive, still breathing, still sitting across from you at a table, but can't remember your middle name or the dog you had growing up. I think that sadness made me permeable in a way I might not have been otherwise. March 11th, a Tuesday. I'd visited my mother that afternoon, and it had been bad. She'd called me Rebecca for the entire visit. Rebecca was her college roommate, had been dead since 2014. I sat in the facility's visiting room, holding my mother's hand while she told me about a party she and the other Rebecca had gone to in 1971, and how the band had played Brown-Eyed Girl, and everyone had danced on the lawn. She was happy in the memory, luminous almost. And I sat there and smiled and said, "That sounds wonderful," and drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel of my 12-year-old Civic. I got home at 6:30, didn't eat, sat on the couch and cried for about an hour, which was something I allowed myself to do once a week, on a schedule, like everything else. Then I washed my face, closed the windows, locked the door, and sat in the quiet. 8:15. I was on the couch with my earbuds in, not listening to anything, just having them in because the rules said headphones were recommended, and at that point following the rules felt like the only thing I had control over. And I heard something. Not from the hallway, not from outside. From the wall between my unit and 2B, Dale's unit. It was humming. Low, barely there, right at the threshold where sound meets vibration. Not mechanical, not the building's pipes or HVAC. It was tonal. It had a melody, or the suggestion of one. Something simple and circular, like a lullaby being hummed by someone who'd forgotten most of the notes and was just tracing the shape of it from memory. I took out my earbuds. The humming was still there. I got up and walked to the wall, put my hand on it. The wall was warm, not the faint residual warmth you get from a shared wall where someone's heater is running, warm the way skin is warm, alive warm. And the humming was coming from inside the wall, not from Dale's side of it, but from within the structure itself, from the brick and the lathe and the whatever was between. I stood there with my palm on that warm wall, and the humming moved through my hand and up my arm, and I felt, and this is the part that scared me more than anything, I felt comforted, genuinely comforted, like being held, like being a child, and pressing your face into your mother's shoulder and feeling the vibration of her voice through her chest as she said something you were too young to understand but too safe to care about. I pulled my hand away. The humming continued for another few seconds, then faded, The wall cooled back to its normal temperature. I checked the time. 8:31. I did not mention it to Dale. I did not contact Donna. I sat on my couch and stared at that wall until 9 o'clock, and then I got up and made a bowl of cereal and ate it standing at the kitchen counter because I needed to do something normal with my hands. It happened again the next night, and the night after. Not always humming. Sometimes it was something closer to breathing, long, slow, oceanic inhales and exhales that seemed to come from the building's bones. Sometimes it was more tactile than auditory, a vibration in the floor, a pulse in the countertop when I rested my hands on it. Always during quiet hour, always faint, always, and I hate admitting this, always comforting. By the end of that week, I'd stopped putting my earbuds in. I'd sit on the couch during quiet hour and just listen. It felt like the building was keeping me company. And I was lonely. I was so lonely. I talked to my clients over email. I talked to my mother, who thought I was Rebecca. I talked to my sister on the phone once a week in conversations that were mostly logistics about the facility bills. I had acquaintance-level friendships with my neighbors, and that was it. The warmth in the walls, the humming, the breathing. It felt like being known, like being acknowledged by something that didn't need me to perform competence or stability or okayness. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand how it felt, not what it was. What it was came later. How it felt is what matters for understanding why I did what I did next. March 19th, Wednesday, 8:05 p.m. I was sitting on the couch and the humming started, and this time it was louder. Not startlingly so, but enough that I could almost make out the melody. It sounded like something I knew, something from a very long time ago. And I did something the rules explicitly told me not to do. I spoke, not loudly, almost a whisper. I said, "I can hear you." The humming stopped, immediately, like a recording being cut. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear my own pulse in my ears, the refrigerator compressor cycling, the tick of the wall clock in the kitchen. Everything except what had been there a moment before. Then, from somewhere I could not locate. Not the wall, not the ceiling, not outside, somewhere directionless, somewhere that seemed to exist in the apartment the way a smell exists in a room, diffusely, without a point of origin. A voice said a single word. My name. My actual name. Not Rebecca. Not Bud. Not hey or excuse me. My name spoken in a voice that had no gender and no age and no accent and no breath behind it. My name said the way you'd say it if you were reading it off a list, identifying it, confirming it. Not warmly, not coldly, factually. And then quiet hour continued as if nothing had happened. And at 9 o'clock the building came alive again, and Dale's TV murmured through the wall in its usual way. And I sat on my couch and realized that I had broken rule number 4 or 5, or maybe some rule that wasn't even on the list, and something had answered. I called in sick to my contracts the next day. I didn't visit my mother. I sat in the Tulsa Central Library on the 4th floor at one of the public terminals, and I searched for everything I could find about 4200 East 31st Street. Harmon Terrace had been built in 1979. Original developer was a company called Capstone Properties, which had gone through 3 ownership changes and was now part of a regional management group based in Broken Arrow. The complex had been built on land that, prior to development, had been a stretch of mixed residential and light commercial property going back to the 1920s. Tulsa in the 1920s. I need you to sit with that for a moment because I did. The 1921 Tulsa race massacre happened north of where Harmon Terrace sits. Greenwood is miles from East 31st, but I found in the Tulsa Historical Society's digitized records that the aftershocks of what happened in 1921 rippled outward through the city in ways that didn't stay inside neat geographic boundaries. Families displaced from Greenwood scattered. Some went south. Some tried to rebuild in neighborhoods that weren't technically redlined but were hostile in subtler ways. And in the 1940s and 50s, as Tulsa expanded south and east, the patterns of who lived where and who was pushed out and where the bodies were, literal and metaphorical, those patterns got paved over, built on, turned into strip malls and apartment complexes and parking lots. I couldn't find anything specific to the Harmon Terrace lot. No incident reports, no historical markers, no documented events. But I found something else. In the Tulsa World Archives, paywalled but accessible through the library's database subscription, I found a letter to the editor from 1983, 4 years after Harmon Terrace was built. The letter was from a man named Gerald Harmon. And yes, I noticed the name, and yes, the complex is called Harmon Terrace, and I am going to get to that. And it was short, only about 200 words. He was writing in response to an article about new apartment developments in the Midtown area. He said that the Harmon Terrace complex, which he identified as being named after his family, had been built on the site of his grandparents' property, which had been a boarding house in the 1930s and 40s. He said the boarding house had served members of the colored community who could not find accommodation elsewhere in the city, and that it had been a place of rest for the weary and displaced. He said his grandmother, Alma Harmon, had run it until her death in 1952, at which point the property had fallen into disrepair and eventually been sold. He ended the letter with a line that I read 4 times. My grandmother always said the house took care of people. She meant it literally. After she died, I believe it continued to try. I sat in the library and stared at that sentence on the screen, and the air conditioning hummed above me, and outside the window the Tulsa skyline was flat and gray under a March overcast. And I thought about the warmth in the wall, the breathing, the humming that sounded like a lullaby. The house took care of people. A boarding house for displaced black families in 1930s and 40s Tulsa. A place that existed because the city had failed. Violently, deliberately, catastrophically. To protect its own people. And so something smaller and quieter had tried to fill that gap. Alma Harmon's boarding house. And now, 70-some years after she died, on the same patch of earth, something in the walls of Building B was still... what? Running? Operating? Caring? I went back to the databases. I searched for Alma Harmon. I searched for the boarding house. I found almost nothing. One mention in a 1947 directory of colored businesses and services that listed Harmon's Rest, Room and Board, East 31st, near Peoria. That was it. A woman who spent decades keeping strangers safe in a city that would rather they didn't exist. And the historical record gave her 11 words. But something remained of what she'd built. Something in the ground or in the air or in whatever substrate holds the intentions of the dead. And it was still trying to take care of people. That was the story I told myself, sitting in the library. It was a good story, a kind one. A story where the horror was just history being misread, where the rules existed to protect something gentle, where the humming in the walls was love that hadn't finished its work. It was also, I would learn, only about a third of the truth. I went home that evening with a feeling I can only describe as tender. I felt like I'd been given a secret that was also a gift. I closed up for quiet hour with something like reverence, and when the humming started, I sat on the couch and listened to it the way you'd listen to someone you were grateful for. I didn't speak again. I just listened. At 8:40, someone knocked on my door. The rules said don't answer. The rules said don't acknowledge. The rules said don't approach. I stayed on the couch. The knocking came again. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, polite. The kind of knock a neighbor uses when they need to borrow something. Then a voice, and it was Yolanda's voice from the hallway, clear as glass. Hey, can you open up? I need help. Something's wrong with the water in my unit and it's flooding. Please. Yolanda lived in 2D, across the hall. I could hear what sounded like urgency in her voice and underneath it what sounded like splashing, running water. I stood up. I took 3 steps toward the door. Then I stopped because something was wrong with the sound, and it took me a moment to figure out what it was. Yolanda's voice was coming from the right place. The hallway, about where you'd stand if you were outside 2D and calling across to 2C. The splashing was coming from the right place too, but the knocking had come from the wrong height, not chest height, where a person's fist would naturally land on a door. Higher, at least a foot higher, almost at the top of the door frame. I backed away from the door. I went to the couch. I sat down and put my earbuds in and pressed my hands flat against my thighs, and I did not move until 9 p.m. At 9:02 I opened my door. The hallway was dry, fluorescent, normal. Yolanda's door was closed. I knocked on it at a normal height, and she answered in sweatpants and a scrub top, eating yogurt from a plastic cup. You okay? I asked. She looked at me. Then her face did the thing. The emptying out thing. The recognition of something she wasn't going to discuss. You didn't open the door, she said. Not a question. No. Good. She took a bite of yogurt. That happens sometimes. It's happened to me twice. Whatever it is, it's not creative about it. Emergency. Come quick, open the door. Same playbook every time. What is it? She looked past me down the hallway toward the stairwell door at the end. Her eyes moved along the ceiling, the walls, the carpet, like she was checking that everything was where it should be. I don't know what it is during quiet hour, she said. I know what it is the rest of the time. The rest of the time it's just a building. But between 8 and 9, she trailed off, shook her head. Donna says it's been this way since the complex was built. She says the people before her said it was this way even before the complex, when there was a house here. The boarding house. She looked at me sharply. You went looking. I found a letter in the Tulsa World, from Gerald Harmon. Yolanda set her yogurt down on the small table by her door. She leaned against the frame and crossed her arms, and for a moment she looked very tired. The specific tiredness of a person who works in a hospital and knows exactly how many ways a body can fail. Gerald Harmon is Donna's uncle, she said. Donna's maiden name is Harmon. Her grandmother was Alma Harmon. Donna inherited the management contract for this complex because her family has been tied to this land for nearly 100 years. I felt the floor shift under me, not literally, perceptually, the way the ground shifts when a piece of information reorganizes everything you thought you knew. Donna is. She's family. This is her family's land. And whatever's in Building B is, as far as I can tell, her family's responsibility. Yolanda picked up her yogurt again. I don't know the whole history. I don't want to. But I think the boarding house did something. Or something was done to the boarding house, or for it. That made it more than just a building. And when they tore it down and built the complex on top of it, that something didn't go away. It just adapted. And the rules are Donna's way of managing it. Managing what, though? What happens during quiet hour? I told you, I don't know. And I think that's the point. I think the rules exist so that we never have to find out. She said goodnight and closed her door, and I stood in the hallway under the fluorescent lights and tried to make the columns balance. And they wouldn't. Because there were 2 things happening during quiet hour, and they contradicted each other. The humming, the warmth, the comfort, the lullaby feeling. That was one thing. The knocking, The voice that wasn't Yolanda, the wrongness of the height, and the fraudulence of the emergency. That was something else, and they both happened in the same hour, in the same building, on the same yellow page of rules. Unless they were the same thing, unless the comfort and the predation were not separate entities but two behaviors of a single entity, and the rules existed not just to keep us safe, but to keep us from seeing the whole picture, from understanding what we were living inside of. April. The trees in the courtyard started budding. Oklahoma spring arrived with its usual bipolar energy. 70 degrees and sunny one day, 40 and sleeting the next, tornado watches scrolling across the bottom of every local broadcast. I was still following the rules. Every night, 8 to 9, sealed up, silent, obedient. And every night, the building breathed and hummed and was warm, and occasionally something knocked or spoke from the hallway with a voice it had borrowed, and I sat on my couch and let the hour pass. But I wasn't sleeping well, and it wasn't because of quiet hour, or not directly. It was because of what quiet hour had become in my mind. An hour every day when I sat and felt cared for by something I couldn't see, while also knowing that the same something wanted me to open the door and was willing to lie to get me to do it. The cognitive dissonance was eroding me. I'd lie in bed at 11, midnight, and think, what does it want? Why comfort and deception in the same breath? What kind of thing loves you and lies to you at the same time? And then I'd think, that's what grief is. That's what memory is. My mother loves me and tells me I'm Rebecca, and both of those things are true at once, and neither one cancels the other out. And I have to sit with both every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in a visiting room in Broken Arrow. Maybe the building was the same way. Maybe whatever Alma Harmon had poured into this place, her care, her protectiveness, her decades of keeping vulnerable people safe, had survived her death, but not intact. Maybe it had degraded the way memory degrades. The love was still there, but it had forgotten the shape of the people it was supposed to love, and now it reached out in whatever direction it could. And sometimes the reaching felt like comfort, and sometimes it felt like a hand on a door that wasn't yours, knocking from the wrong height, wearing your neighbor's voice because it couldn't remember its own. That's the story I was telling myself by mid-April, and I know how it sounds. I know it sounds like I was romanticizing it, making it gentle when it wasn't, turning something dangerous into something sad because sadness was easier for me to carry. My therapist. I'd been seeing one virtually every other week, which was all I could afford. My therapist would probably say I was projecting my mother's illness onto the building, seeing dementia everywhere because it was the lens I was looking through. Maybe. Probably. But I was also right, at least partially. I know that now. April 23rd, a Wednesday. I remember the date because it was the day after my mother failed to recognize me at all for the first time. Not Rebecca, not anyone. She'd looked at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into her room, polite but uninvested, the way you look at someone in a waiting room. I'd driven home in silence. No radio, no podcast. Just the hum of the Civic and the sound of I-44 under the tires and the very specific sound of someone trying not to cry while driving, which is mostly just breathing. I got home at 7:30. I didn't eat. I closed the windows and locked the door and sat on the floor. Not the couch. The floor, with my back against the wall between my unit and Dale's. And I waited for quiet hour the way you wait for someone to come home. Like I needed it. Like the humming and the warmth were the only things left in my day that felt like being held. 8 o'clock came. The building went silent. I pressed my back against the wall and waited. Nothing happened. 8:05, 8:10, 8:15. No humming, no warmth, no breathing in the walls. The building was just a building. Quiet, but the regular kind. the kind that comes from sound-dampened walls and closed doors and people watching TV with the volume low. I sat there until 8:40 and felt nothing, and the nothing was worse than anything the building had ever done to me, because I had been depending on it. I had let this thing, this whatever it was, this remnant, this echo, this haunting, I had let it become my source of comfort, and now it was gone. And I was alone on the floor of a $640 a month apartment with my back against a cold wall, and my mother didn't know who I was, and I had nothing. At 8:43, the knocking started. Not on my door, on the wall, behind me. 3 knocks, gentle from inside the wall, right where my shoulder blades rested against it. And a voice. Not Yolanda's this time. Not Dale's. A voice I had never heard before but recognized anyway, in the way you recognize a word in a language you studied years ago and mostly forgot, the meaning arriving before the translation. It was an old woman's voice, thin and clear and patient, and it said, "Come downstairs, baby. There's room." I did not move. "There's room," the voice said again. "You don't have to stay up there alone. Come down. I'll leave the light on." My vision blurred, and I realized I was crying, not from fear, but from want. The voice sounded the way safety sounds, the way a kitchen sounds when someone's cooking and the radio's on, and you're small enough that the world is just the size of that room. I wanted to go wherever the voice was inviting me, downstairs, into the walls, into the ground, into whatever was left of Alma Harmon's boarding house, buried under 70 years of concrete and rebar and other people's indifference. But I had read the yellow page, and the yellow page said, "Do not acknowledge it verbally. Do not approach the door." The wall. The door. Was there a difference? The rules specified the door. They didn't say anything about the wall. They didn't say anything about a voice that came from inside the building's skeleton rather than from the hallway. Was this a gap in the rules, or was this something the rules hadn't anticipated? "Come down," the voice said, a third time, and there was something in it now that hadn't been there before. A thinness, a strain, like someone lifting something heavy and starting to tire. Like the effort of reaching across whatever distance separated the voice from me was costing something, and it couldn't maintain it much longer. I pressed my hands flat against the floor, and I said, out loud, knowing I was breaking the rules, knowing it and doing it anyway, "I can't." Silence. Long silence. The clock in the kitchen ticked. My refrigerator compressor cycled on. Then the voice, very faintly, "I know." And that was it. The warmth came back into the wall, briefly, like a hand squeezing mine and letting go. The humming returned, very soft for the last 12 minutes of quiet hour. At 9 o'clock, the building came alive again, and I got off the floor, and went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror, and tried to figure out what I was becoming. I went to Donna the next morning. She was in the leasing office with her coffee and her reading glasses and a spreadsheet of her own. Something related to the complex's maintenance budget, from what I could see. I sat down across from her, and I told her everything. The humming, the warmth, the knocking, the voice, the library research, Gerald Harmon's letter, what Yolanda had told me, all of it. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she took off her glasses, set them on the desk, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Not the practical friendliness, not the don't ask about it blankness. Something older, something inherited. "My grandmother built the boarding house in 1934, she said. She was 26 years old, 13 years after the massacre. Her parents had lived in Greenwood. They'd survived. They'd relocated south. They'd rebuilt, the way everyone who survived tried to rebuild. And my grandmother, when she was old enough, she opened the boarding house because she understood that the rebuilding was never going to be finished. that there would always be people who needed a place to rest that the city wasn't going to give them. She picked up her coffee, looked at it, set it back down without drinking. She ran that house for 18 years, and somewhere in those 18 years, I don't know when, I don't know how, the house started helping. My mother told me stories. Guests who arrived sick and left healthy. A woman in labor whose bleeding stopped the moment she crossed the threshold. A man who hadn't slept in weeks who passed out in the front room and slept for 14 hours and woke up clear-eyed. My grandmother never claimed credit. She'd say the house was doing it. She'd talk about it the way you'd talk about a good dog. Loyal, protective. Not always smart about how it showed it, but always trying. And when she died? When she died, the house changed, not right away. My mother was a teenager then, in '52, and she said the house was fine for a few years after, still warm, still safe. But it started getting confused. Guests would hear things at night, voices in the walls and footsteps on the stairs when nobody was there. The house was still trying to take care of people, but it was. The best word my mother used was forgetting. It was forgetting how. Like it had been running on my grandmother's intentions, and without her, the intentions started to blur. Like dementia, I said, and the word came out before I could stop it. And Donna looked at me, and I could see that I had named something she had been thinking for a long time. Yes, she said quietly. Like that. What happened to the house? It got worse. By the late '60s, the guests were having experiences that weren't comforting anymore. The house was trying to keep people inside, doors that stuck, windows that wouldn't open. And the voices started asking people to come downstairs. Even when there was no downstairs, the house didn't have a basement. It was like the house had invented a place inside itself that didn't correspond to any real room, and it wanted to bring people there. I thought about the voice saying, "Come downstairs, baby, there's room." I thought about what downstairs meant in a building with no basement, on a piece of land that had been holding displaced people since the 1930s. They tore it down in '76, Donna continued. The family sold the land to Capstone Properties and they built the complex. My Uncle Gerald thought that would be the end of it. Demolish the house, demolish whatever was in it. But it wasn't in the house. It was in the land. Or it was in the intention. Or it was in whatever my grandmother had done or become during those 18 years. The complex went up, and the thing was still there. And it fixed on Building B because Building B sits on the exact footprint of the original boarding house. I checked the surveys. And the rules. The rules are mine. I wrote them in 1998 when I took over management. Before that, my mother managed the complex, and before that, my uncle. They had their own versions, verbal instructions mostly. My mother would just tell each new tenant what to do and hope they listened. I wrote them down because I needed it to be a system, something I could hand someone on a piece of paper and know I'd done my part. Do the rules work? They've worked so far. Nobody's been seriously harmed. A few people have had experiences. You're not the first to hear the humming or the voices. But as long as people stay in their units with the doors closed, the hour passes and the building resets. Every night, 8 to 9. It reaches out. It tries to bring people in. And at 9, it lets go. Brings people in where? Donna was quiet for a long time. The office was very still. Outside, I could hear a car pulling into the parking lot, tires on the damp asphalt. I don't know, she said, and that's the truth. I don't know if there's a place or if it's just the reaching that exists, with nothing on the other end, like a reflex, like a hand that keeps grabbing even when there's nothing to hold. Or like a mother, I said, who keeps calling your name even when she can't remember who you are. Donna looked at me. Her eyes were bright and wet, and she blinked once, slowly, and said, "Yes." Like that. We sat there for a while, two women in an office in Tulsa, holding a grief between them that was both completely different and exactly the same. I stayed at Harmon Terrace. I know that probably surprises you. But where was I going to go? $640 a month, close to my mother's facility, quiet neighborhood, decent water pressure. You don't leave a place like that in this economy because the walls hum during 1 hour of the day. You adapt. You follow the rules. You go on living. But I need to tell you what happened in May, because that's the part I haven't been able to stop thinking about, and it's the reason I'm telling this story at all. May 9th, a Friday. I came home from visiting my mother. A good visit. She'd known my name. She'd held my hand and told me I looked tired and asked if I was eating enough. And I was in a good mood for the first time in weeks. I parked, walked across the courtyard, climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway of Building B was empty. It was 6:45 in the evening, full daylight still streaming through the window at the end of the corridor. I walked toward 2C, my keys in my hand, and I saw, for just a moment, a door that wasn't there. Between 2B and 2C, in the wall where there was no door, had never been a door, could not architecturally be a door because the other side of that wall was Dale's bathroom. A door. Dark wood, not the hollow core veneer of the apartment doors. Solid. Old. With a brass knob that had been worn smooth by decades of hands. And at the bottom of the door, a thin line of warm amber light. The kind of light that comes from incandescent bulbs. The kind that doesn't exist in fluorescent hallways. I blinked, and it was gone. Just wall, off-white paint, brown carpet, fluorescent light. I stood there with my keys in my hand and my heart doing something complicated in my chest. And I understood. Not thought, not hypothesized. Understood. That the door was always there. That it was there right now, just not in a way I could see outside of whatever slippage had let me glimpse it. That between every unit in Building B, behind every wall, underneath every floor, there was a door to a place that didn't exist on any architectural plan, and during quiet hour, that place opened up and reached for the people on the other side and tried to bring them home. Not home. That's the wrong word. Tried to bring them in, to whatever Alma Harmon's boarding house had become in the 74 years since she died. A place of rest, a place of room, a place that had been built to hold the weary and displaced and had forgotten how to let them go. I went into my apartment. I closed the door. I sat on the couch. I wanted to go through that door so badly my teeth ached. Not because I was suicidal. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't trying to die. I was trying to be held. I was trying to be in a place where someone knew my name and said it correctly and meant it. And the building was offering that. Every night, 8 to 9, it was offering a room in a house that had been demolished in 1976, run by a woman who had been dead for 74 years in a city that had burned its own people and paved over the ash. The horror isn't that the building wants to consume you. That's the easy version. The comfortable one. Monster in the walls, don't open the door, simple. The horror is that the building loves you, that it's been loving people on this patch of land since 1934. And it's going to keep loving them whether they want it or not. Whether it helps them or swallows them. Whether the love looks like a warm wall, or a voice at the wrong height, or a door in a place where no door can be. The horror is that love without a living mind behind it is just hunger with better intentions. And the rules exist not to protect you from a monster, but to protect you from a kindness that has lost the ability to let you walk away from it. It's September now, or it was, when I started writing this. I'm still in 2C. I follow the rules every night. The humming comes, and I listen to it, and sometimes the knocking comes, and I don't answer it. And sometimes the voice comes and I don't respond. And at 9 o'clock, the building lets go, and I go on with my evening. But something has changed in the last few weeks, and it's the reason I'm writing this, and not just living with it like Dale and Yolanda and Ren and every other tenant in Building B. Quiet hour is getting longer. Not officially. The rules still say 8 to 9. Donna hasn't issued any updates. But on August 28th, the humming didn't start until 8:15 and didn't stop until 9:12. I checked. I timed it. On September 3rd, it started at 8 and ran until 9:20. On September 7th, last Sunday, the building didn't fully settle until 9:31. The hallway sounds didn't come back. The other tenants' TVs and voices and footsteps didn't resume until 9:31. I told Donna. She already knew. She'd been fielding calls from other Building B tenants. She didn't look surprised. She looked the way someone looks when a thing they've been dreading finally starts to happen. It's been getting longer for about 3 months, she said. By a minute or two each time. I've been tracking it. What does that mean? I don't know. Maybe the same thing it means when anything old and confused gets worse. Maybe it's forgetting where the boundaries are. Maybe it's been 8 to 9 for so long that it's starting to push, the way a person with memory issues starts to lose their sense of time. 5 minutes feels like an hour. An hour feels like 5 minutes. Donna, what happens when it gets to a point where it's not just 1 hour? She didn't answer. She picked up her coffee. She took a sip. She set it down. I rewrote the rules last week, she said. New version. Haven't distributed it yet. The new version says 7:30 to 9:30, just to give us a buffer. And when 7:30 to 9:30 isn't enough, then I'll rewrite them again. She said it with the flatness of someone describing a retaining wall against a flood. You build it higher and higher, and when the water overtops it anyway, you build it higher again. Because what else are you going to do? Move everyone out? Condemn the building? The thing isn't in the building, it's in the land. You could demolish Harmon Terrace and build a parking lot, and the asphalt would still hum between sunset and dark. And whoever parked there would hear a voice asking them to come inside. And there would be no rules on a yellow page to tell them not to listen. I think about the borders of quiet hour the way I think about my mother's lucid moments. Shrinking. Still there, but less and less each time. The clear spaces between the confusion getting smaller. The confusion spilling into territory it didn't used to reach. My mother on a good day knows me for 20 minutes. On a bad day, 5. Some day, 0. And the building, on a good night, holds itself to an hour. On a bad night, an hour and a half. Someday. I don't know what someday looks like. I don't know what it means when a haunting forgets its own schedule, when the kindness behind it loses the last of the structure that kept it from being something else entirely. I don't know what Building B becomes when quiet hour is all hours. But I know I can hear the humming right now as I write this. And it's 10:47 p.m., and no one told it could still be here, and it's warm, and it sounds like a song I used to know, and I want to put my hand on the wall so badly. I'm not going to. I'm not going to. I think the most frightening thing I've ever realized is that following the rules doesn't make you safe. It just means the thing on the other side of the wall respects you enough to wait. And respect, like love, like memory, like everything else in a building that's been trying to hold people for 90 years, respect fades. One day I'll come home and the door will be in the hallway again. The old dark wood door with the brass knob worn smooth, and it will be open. And the light inside will be amber and warm, and I'll hear a voice I almost recognize saying my name. And the rules will say don't go in, and the rules will be right. And I will stand there in the fluorescent hallway of a $640 a month apartment in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I will have to choose between the world that forgets me and the door that won't. I'm telling you this so that if I stop posting, if I go quiet, if someone asks whatever happened to that woman in 2C, you'll know I didn't disappear. I was invited somewhere. And on the night it finally happened, I want there to be at least one record that says, she knew. She knew what it was. She knew what it cost. And for as long as she could, she stayed on this side of the wall. But the walls are so warm, and it's so cold out here, and quiet hour is getting longer, and I am so tired of not being held.